Pleasure to introduce Anna Klonkowska from the University of Gdansk in Poland. Anna came to us a few years ago first as a visiting scholar, became very interested in doing a comparative study, which is now she's been doing for several years, and now we're going to hear the benefits of the research that she's been doing here about trans masculinities in Poland and the United States. So it's a comparative sociological study of how transgender works in very different circumstances, very different contexts. So we're thrilled to have you, and the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you for having me here, and happy birthday, Michael.
Cheers.
My lecture is based on a qualitative research project I've been carrying out while staying here at the Center for the Study of Men and Masculinities. And the project is aimed to compare the attitudes of transgender men in Poland and the United States toward dominant notions of masculinity in their respective countries. Focusing on female who had been recognized as female at birth but self-identify as male, I wanted to address their ways of defining masculinity, attitudes toward accomplishing socially acknowledged patterns of masculinity, and redefining their gender identity. This study compares Polish and US transgender men's efforts to negotiate personal and social identity in light of dominant masculine ideals. And due to its recent history, Poland seems to be an interesting country in which to study trans masculinity. First of all, it's been 44 years of communism, the fall of communism in 1989, and joining the European Union in 2004. And all of this affected Polish people's worldviews and notions of certain roles, including gender roles. Moreover, the political and ideological changes after 1989 and in recent years have influenced the legal and social situation of transgender people in Poland. All these factors influence the notions of masculinity and attitude toward the socially dominant male role models among transgender people in Poland. And since a majority of social theories on masculinity and on trans masculinity have been developed in the United States, the US appeared to be an adequate ground for carrying out a comparative study, aiming to analyze the specificity of Polish trans masculinity, similarities and unique differences. My methodology has been inspired by grounded theory in its constructionist approach. I have collected 30 in-depth, intensive interviews among transgender men in Poland and 27 interviews in the United States. The Polish respondents were all white, they were all of Slavic origin, and this is not surprising because Poland is a very homogeneous country. And among my respondents in the US, 5 people were Hispanic, one person was partly Native American, and all the other respondents were white Americans. I didn't have an opportunity to interview any US men who were Asian Americans, black or other minorities. Of course, being aware that all of us have limited time when we can focus our attention, I promise not to tell you about all the results of my research. I've just chosen some of them. In fact, I have to forewarn you before I start that I have no jaw-dropping results. Nothing like, you would never believe that, or it's an unexpected difference. It's just some remarks on. I found some similarities concerning the attitudes and situation of trans men in Poland and in US, and these issues may be more universal for trans men in general. I also found some differences for which I would like to propose some explanations. So, first of all, while discussing the dominant notions of masculinity in their respective countries, as well as their own attitudes towards it, Polish respondents would more likely talk about masculinity as one model, one dominant model, while the US respondents would pertain to masculinities as many concurrent models. The US participants were paying particular attention to differences dependent on the person's racial or ethnical background. And I think there are a few models of masculinity, and I think that is due to a different context. Masculinity is performed differently. Even as an American person, depending on, like, for example, your race, or depending on, for example, your age. I think those are two biggest contributors in the ways in which certain characteristics of masculinity manifest themselves or are being performed. I think that really depends family to family or culture to culture in America. I know mostly Hispanic families. That's what I am and where I grew up. That's mostly Hispanic. And some are different types or ways. Well, the lack of reference to racial or ethnical context in defining masculinity in Poland doesn't surprise me because, as I've already mentioned, Poland is a very homogeneous country. Also, among the US respondents, it was mostly members of minority groups who would particularly highlight the dependence on the ethnical or racial context. Yet, I found one thing especially surprising. Even though the US respondents would tend to talk about diversity of masculinities, the descriptions they gave me almost every time refer to the same characteristics. Encompassing strengths, being non-emotional, being the breadwinner and protector. So the US respondents would tell me there are many masculinities. It all depends on family origin, it depends on the culture you come from, but then the descriptions they gave me were very similar to each other. And some examples. Men are expected to be just like these big, strong people, and whether or not like those things manifest themselves through physical traits of being like a tall person or very strong or muscular person or through the way one conducts themselves, like interpersonally, not showing any weakness. The man is the one that makes things easier for the rest of the family, like the breadwinner. That's typical what I've seen. The man is the one who makes sure the house is taken care of and that the family has what they need. They're supposed to be strong, supposed to be non-emotional. I guess that's the main two features, really. Like, you know, supposed to be the breadwinner, I guess. Strong and non-emotional. But the declared diversity of masculinities and then the similarity of actual descriptions doesn't have to be perceived as a paradox. Maybe, as one of my respondents said, I think it's different takes on the same model. Like it's the same general idea, but it might differ slightly depending on a culture or a family. But there was another observation that I found even more challenging. The Polish respondents, on the contrary, would claim that there is one dominant model of masculinity, just one. But then the descriptions they gave me would differ. And this made me, the descriptions they gave me, they were oscillating from a self-possessed protector and guardian through an acquisitive, achieving, assertive leader to a macho-like character. And this made me puzzled. Were they also addressing to some general core of divergent models of masculinity? Or was the diversity of descriptions simply a trait of culture, like in a joke that we have, that if two Polish people meet to discuss something, at least 3 different opinions will appear. It could also be that Polish people are aware how homogeneous is our society. Concerning ethnicity, religion, culture. So my respondents could be convinced that their opinion would be relatively representative for the whole society. And in fact, maybe they were not aware that there are some differences among them. Of notice that most of the Polish interviewees would also, just like the US respondents, mention strengths, understood as both emotional and physical strengths, power, demeanor of protecting others, and not expressing emotions that could indicate weakness, as features that are related to masculinity. Strength, courage, loyalty, fight, spear and sword. Some knight, fighter. Also, the descriptions how boys are brought up and socialized to be men seem to be coherent in both countries. Men are brought up thinking that they must be very masculine. That's a Polish citation. Boys were always taught that they shouldn't cry because it's not appropriate. For a girl, it was normal to cry, but for a boy, it was inappropriate. I think it comes from that. Later, even between themselves, they want to be very masculine and do not accept those who aren't. And then a US citation, boys are expected to be more independent than girls, even in childhood. And they are expected not to be emotional, telling them not to cry, don't be a sissy. I mean, at a pretty young age, they are getting those messages that they are supposed to be strong, not emotional, independent. And you know, if they don't fit that model, then supposedly there is something wrong with them. And those descriptions would usually highlight features such as strength, being tough, and hiding emotions that might reveal weakness. Also, my US and Polish respondents would agree that masculinity is taught and learned as not femininity. Boys are expected to be just masculine, and when they do not adhere to those hegemonic ideas of gender, then it is instantly perceived as a feminine trait, whether or not it's something a woman actually does. And any feminine-like behavior in boys is punished in the traditional upbringing. While at the same time, children who were assigned female at birth, according to my respondents, are allowed to be tomboys. I guess I never got those pressures, and my respondents also recall it from their own childhood. I guess I never got those pressures to be like, you know, feminine, or put on makeup, or grow my hair longer, you know, be less independent or strong. Even though I was born female, I would always play with whatever I wanted. In this country, as a young child, girls are allowed to display kind of boyish tendencies without ridicule, whilst the other way, it's obviously not so easy. And the same observations were made by my Polish respondents. For example, my grandfather he had this opinion that a girl can act a bit like a boy, but a boy must be masculine. So I think that if it was the other way around, opposite situation, there may have been some problems. Instead, in my case, there weren't any and everything was okay. My dad, I suppose, it slipped out once when I was doing something that in his opinion wasn't very feminine, said, well, I'd like to have a son. Of course, that was before they were transitioning. It's stories from their childhood, when they were in elementary school and being perceived as girls, they would behave in a boyish way. One of my respondents aptly pointed out that a possible reason for this double standard is this explanation. The performance of those roles, masculinity and femininity, are regulated and enforced differently, because masculinity is inherently tied to a power that plays a huge role, whereas women are inherently perceived to be second to men and therefore less powerful. So there is a degree to which, even through fluidity in femininity is subversive and against gender norms, there is a degree to which it's not even taken seriously. That's where the fluidity comes from. So it seems like masculinity is perceived as being desired, and that it elevates also makes it a bastion of inviolable masculine gender norms to which one can aspire, but one may not abandon. And maybe this causes in the society a more conformist attitude towards masculine gender norms than in case of feminine gender norms. Also, both the US and Polish respondents would say that in their own production of masculinity, they try to distance themselves from the dominant notions of masculinity in their countries. That sometimes they even define and shape their own identity by referring to what kind of men they don't want to be. They also seem to be more aware than cisgender men of the social construction of masculinity and more critical towards it. This is probably because transgender people, due to their more complex socialization to gender norms, are in a unique position to tell us about our gendered selves. And maybe this awareness of social construction of masculinity could be the reason that many of my respondents found it difficult to explain how do they negotiate their masculinities. I'm not sure what it is that I possess that makes me feel masculine. I certainly don't have any of those qualities, the qualities he previously defined as masculine qualities. That's kind of a social thing that obviously I didn't grow up with. So there is something more internal that gives you masculinity. I'm just not sure what it is. I don't have physical strength at all, any physical strength, really. I don't have a lot of confidence. So I don't have most things that I actually describe as masculine. Yet something internally tells me I have masculinity. That is most likely the thing that you are born with. It's something that is internally in there. It's always been there. I just don't know what that is. Thus, on one hand, my respondents would, to some extent, distance themselves from the dominant notion of masculinity, yet on the other hand, they wanted to blend in. And male gender performativity was important for them. But their opinions, and it was the same both in Poland and in US, on whether the skill to be masculine in your behavior, body language, etc., whether it's something inherent that someone is born with, or whether it's something that is acquired, so their opinions would differ on that. Some of my respondents would claim you were born with it. Others would tell me stories, how did they try to acquire the skill to walk in a masculine way, to speak in a masculine way. And let's compare these two citations. For certain things, I had to learn how to be masculine. I've been told that I have some feminine characteristics that make me seem I'm a gay guy. Because that's how people view it. You have some feminine characteristics, then you must be gay. So obviously for me that's not the case. I have feminine characteristics because that's how I was raised. I was raised and socialized to be feminine. So that's how I was taught. You have to sit up straight like a lady, you know, cross your legs. So I had to break myself of these habits. Because you know, people see the way you stand, and if you stand with your hip pointed out, that's how a woman stands. But if you stand straight, that's how a man stands. So for certain things, I have to break myself of certain habits. Especially before, I looked and sounded not as masculine as I do. And always people were confused how to call me, what gender I was. Because they would think like, you dress like a guy, but you carry yourself this way and sound, and all becomes complicated. So I had a certain sense of masculinity, but I had to develop it. And the way I did it was, I just based it on the people I had around me. Carlos came around, my stepdad, and certain aspects around him. Obviously, I would change it towards me. But I would see that this is the way he handles certain things, that this is the way he walks. And that's a contrary description. This is not an external thing. This is something you are born with. No one taught me how to walk or sit or throw a ball. I have a natural way of doing it. And it was never on the feminine model. And if someone suggested, why you're sitting like this, it was all natural to me. Someone would say, you walk, you know, masculine. that was not anything I was taught, or I didn't model it after my father. It just came naturally. There is a joke about throwing like a girl, you throw like a girl. I never did that. I automatically picked up the ball and threw it. These both citations come from my US respondents, but similarly in Poland. Some people would claim that gender performativity is something you're born with, something inherent. Others would say it's something socially constructed, something you have to be taught, something you have to be socialized to. Also, some of my respondents, mostly the Polish ones, would say that at the beginning of their transition, they tended to be hyper-masculine in their gender performance, as if they were trying to convince themselves that they are manly enough. I tried to be this kind of turbo guy. Only later I realized that I don't have to be ideal. I don't have to be more masculine than all the other men to be one of them. Some differences appeared when I asked my respondents how do they feel among cis men. Some of the people I interviewed in the US would complain that they can't stand some of cis men behaviors. That's an example. Cis guys make certain comments about females, like sexist comments. Certain locker room talks, I'm okay with, but certain are derogatory. And I'm like, bro, how are you okay talking like that? You've got a mom. I would never want to talk about a female like that because I've got my mom, my sisters. And so they would also complain about the lack of tact among cis men. Yes, actually, one of my co-workers wanted to show me how to be a real man. There was more like, I need to show you how to walk, talk, act. I felt slightly offended, but he wasn't trying to be offensive. Many of my US respondents would also talk about their anxieties while being among cisgender men. Among cis men, I'm like so anxious because I can't help to feel like cis men would either see me as something that I'm not, whether or not they would see me as a gay male, which I'm not, or see me as not male at all. I'm way more focused on how I perform masculinity, especially I'm focused on minimizing the feminine aspects, like mannerisms, or even things like the way I laugh, or the way I gesticulate. In my production of masculinity, I feel very threatened. And a part of that is also on the level of myself as a person who still has a biologically female anatomy. And I'm having like paranoid anxieties about that stuff. But it's in my head. It's not necessarily like there is going to be like a direct attack on my body or anything. But it's more like, we see these feminine traits in you. We're gonna use it to undermine you. It's like suddenly I have this very strong comparison of everything I'm not. And while referring to how they feel among cis men, my respondents quite frequently mentioned the motive of anatomy, especially those of my respondents who rejected the attitude of gender fluidity, and they would identify within the binary concept of masculinity and femininity. I'm grateful that they don't seem to question anything about me. Yet still, you have a little bit of a sense that you're not equal with them. Like I'm just a little bit below than they are. I don't mean below like they're better than me, but I just don't feel completely at the same level with them. Maybe because I didn't have the upbringing, the camaraderie, you know, whatever, the locker room thing. Or maybe I don't have physical, I did hang out with a lot of guys, and they did include me, but I still wasn't completely in their circle. You know, male physical anatomy tends to be something that other men put a lot of weight into. Even if it's not the physical penis, it's the idea of it. They use it in expression. Oh, he's got a big set of balls. That means, you know, he's very aggressive. It's the central concept. And so lacking that naturally, it puts you conceptually in a lesser position than other men. Because it's such a focus. Like if a guy drives a very fancy sports car, they would say, you know, that it's an extension of his penis. Many masculine ideas hold that as a central piece of a puzzle, and when you're lacking that, it automatically makes you feel less masculine, less than equal to them. I can promise that if you ask any other guy that walks out of the building, would you rather lose your penis or would you rather lose your arm? They would rather lose their arm. And my US respondents would usually blame the feelings of uncertainty and lack of self-confidence while being among cisgender men on being brought up as a girl. And even though they stated that children assigned female at birth can be more flexible about their gender performativity and behavior, differentiating socialization that boys and girls receive in the US was often mentioned in this context. Let's take gender and speech and how women are taught to be quiet, at least in the United States. And men, oh my God, freaking culture and gender. Because in American culture, women are taught to be quiet, reserved, not speak unless spoken to. Boys are raised to be the responsible. They are kind of protector, to have a family and high-paid job. There is kind of pressure with that. And girls are kind of raised and taught, either by the society or their friends, to be more like looking for that protector, instead of trying to be independent. Many men have a self-confidence about themselves. And even if they feel maybe insecure inside, they still conduct themselves in a manner that conveys strength, that is self-assuredness. I'm not sure why women don't carry that outward confidence. And I would tend to think that, unfortunately, women that do tend to be insulted for it. In case of Polish interviewees who were also asked about how they feel among cisgender men, those people who would identify as more gender-fluid trans men, they were more likely to complain about cis men behavior and the anxiety they feel while being among them. But the respondents who had a binary perception of gender in relation to their identity, they would, just like in case of US respondents, also mention the issues connected with anatomy. Yet, they also often declared that while being among cis men, they felt just like one of the guys. I've always had male friends. They treated me normally, like other buddies. Brawls, not brawls, normally. A few of my Polish respondents mentioned that if not accepted by some cis men, they tried to be assertive and fight for their cause. And some literally did. A 20-year-old Staś, who lives in a small town, recalls such stories. There are arguments and arguments. I have a few friends who are, to say so, able to persuade something either with the strength of their speech or with the strength of their fists. And they are on my side. So I really don't have to worry about this who I am. Others either accept it or are quiet because they're scared. And I'm lucky to have buddies and friends who are really tall and have such pose. By pose he means arms. So if they punch somebody once and for all, then nothing bothers me. Everyone, if they had something against me, they have told that long time ago, and now they are quiet, because they see that it won't change anything. And if anyone still has something against, also would rather be quiet, because either me or someone else may punch them for that. It was simply a forced tolerance. According to him, acting like that brought him a respect, not only because the intolerant guys were afraid of him or his buddies, but also because by such acts he proved to be a real man who has guts to do this. Even though I haven't punched anybody in their face for a long time, they still remember and know that, nevertheless, I can do this. Of course, such extreme ways of dealing with experienced intolerance are rather rare, yet many of my Polish respondents recall their attempts of being assertive in such situations. I've always been like that. I had to tell something back. I would always say something back, and then it would eventuate in one way or another. And this inclination among Polish trans male to say something back if offended might be connected with a bit different socialization to femininity in their childhood, comparing to what the US respondents recall. Of notice that either they or their mothers have been brought up in communism. That instead of being taught to do not speak unless spoken to, they were surrounded by propaganda promoting the assertive femininity. And I will show you some propaganda posters from communism that women and girls were surrounded by. So these were these images that you would see. And actual women. So they or their mothers also in communism had to develop some survival features. For example, while standing really long hours in food lines or trying to get access to limited goods, you really had to be assertive. A popular Polish proverb depicts this model of femininity. It says, where even devil cannot go himself, he sends a woman. Yet some of my US respondents, especially those who came from Latin families, would also mention this kind of assertive attitude in themselves, which could be derived from a specific female socialization in childhood and what they observed in their mothers. Females in my family, if someone says something to you, you say something back. You don't let them do all over you, but they are more encouraged to cry about it, whereas boys are not. But there is also the position of the loud Latina, who speaks out for herself, who has a strength in her femininity, but does also embody this very, very status like a mother, like nurturer, caregiver. My sister, who is married and has a kid, she came into her loud, assertive self, and she was shown to be that person from my mother. The image of loud Latina with the status of a mother, caregiver who speaks loud out for herself is similar to a well-known iconic female figure in Polish culture. We have this archetype of a Polish mother, a strong feminine figure, full of sacrifice, caring, but also strong, tough, and independent. We even built monuments depicting this archetypical figure. Thus, it may be a paradox, but the model of female socialization that trans men receive in their childhood and what notion of femininity they observe in their mothers may have an influence on their level of assertiveness in their masculinity. Also, quite a few of my US and Polish respondents recall experiencing some kind of male privilege after transitioning. Well, even at work, because I changed my job after the correction, I see that they've started treating me more seriously, as if I knew more than before. Also at home. Earlier, my mom was always trying to teach me how to cook, in which she never succeeded. And now she let it go. It's definitely a privilege, now that she let me off the hook. Earlier, she would say things like, "You're a girl and you won't even help me peel these potatoes." Now she let go. She even says, "Sure thing that a man doesn't know how to peel potatoes, so I will do it myself." There are such situations. She let me off the hook with the cooking, and this is definitely a privilege. And similarly in the US, I had an across-street neighbor, and a flood happened that washed her car into it was like a flash flood. So she was on the phone with the insurance company trying to get through to someone to find out how to process the claim. And when she made the phone call, they transferred her left and right, this person to that person. By the time I got to her apartment, she was just so overwhelmed and frustrated, so I said, "Let me try to call, let me see, if I can get further than you." And she was okay, so she handles me the phone, I get on the phone and get a woman on the phone, and I said, "Hi, my name is Damon, and I'm calling on behalf of on my friend. And I need some answers to some questions. Are you able to help me?" "Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely." I got further than she did. So for me, that was my first male privilege experience over the phone. It was astonishing. Those who didn't recall such experiences usually would say that it depends on the situation and people. It all depends on place and person and the situation. Also, both my Polish and US respondents would agree that in their society in general, there is a different perception of people transitioning female to male than people transitioning male to female. That trans men can more easily blend in and have a better reception. In my opinion, FTM persons are perceived better because in the society there is something like, well, a girl is simply seen as a tomboy. But a boy who displays female features is generally portrayed by a great part of the society as a fag or a tranny. And I think that more often such people are being discriminated. Even in the streets, when people see a girl dressed like a man, they'll say, a butch, right? Everyone will think that and go their own way. But when they see a man wearing a dress, he may be immediately beaten up. Certain things are more okay for female to male than it's for a woman. That's okay for a woman to dress in guy's clothes, but it's not okay for a guy to dress in woman's clothes. And now the person is recalling a conversation with his colleague. For him it was, why would any guy want to be a woman? Of course it would be understandable for a woman to be a guy, but why would a guy want to be a girl and lose all the privilege you have? An important difference, and I promise you this will be the last one I will be talking about today, I will save you the others. So an important difference among US and Polish interviewees appeared regarding the influence of expert discourse and gatekeeping institutions in their transition. The Polish men accounts point out a significant dependence on expert discourse and the diagnostician's expectations of gender performance in order to be allowed to transition. I mean, in Poland people need to go through lots of medical tests, psychological tests, psychiatric tests, and they need to have many visits in the diagnostician's office, and they need to prove to the diagnostician that they will be very normative in their gender after transitioning. When I started to have contact with some sexologists and other specialists, I noticed the exaggeration and expectation with which everyone, that is every transgender person coming for diagnosis, unambiguously define themselves as a man or a woman. It wasn't important if they really defined themselves unambiguously, as long as they fit the stereotype the sexologist had. People generally did learn or find out what their answers should be like and would continue to make a sham just to make sure the diagnosis would be in their favor. And because, as Connell says, the most important feature of contemporary hegemonic masculinity is that it is heterosexual, trans men in Poland are expected to be sexually attracted to women. Otherwise, the person's belonging to the experienced gender is called into question. And sometimes it even turns into a ridicule what people are ready to do to convince the diagnostician that they will be very normative in their gender performance after transitioning. Actually, my friends and I, we went to our sexologist. We just needed a diagnosis. I realized that a person was expected to have a heterosexual attitude in relation to the experienced gender. As it happened, I had, so it was no problem for me. But it seemed like a little awkward for me that he would attach such a significance to this. And it was so important during the diagnosis that I had a girlfriend. And I was supposed to show him pictures of me with her, and even better, I should have brought her with me. It's like having a girlfriend then or now, or not having a girlfriend, had a tremendous impact on whether I was a man or not. And later on, I met some people who needed that same diagnosis, that paper. There was actually a practice of lending each other girlfriends to fulfill some stereotypical expectation. So everyone had to come to this office with a girlfriend, but she also needed to fit the overall picture of a girlfriend. So when someone had a girlfriend who was significantly older than him, he would have to come with someone who was closer to his age. If he was with someone taller, he took a girl who would be a bit shorter. It was all totally absurd. The US respondents didn't seem to experience such severe pressures from their diagnosticians to be allowed to start their medical and legal transition. Most places need a letter from a therapist or clinician for you to take hormones, and certain doctors may need a doctor's note from a physician for you to get the surgery. It all depends. And I know there is something like a formal consent that you can say that you consent to take hormones and you're not suing anyone. But it's not like a huge thing because the doctors don't ask for it. And about his own experience with the diagnostician, she just wanted to see where I was emotionally, if I could handle this. So I've promised you to save you the rest of my observations, and I'm going to keep my promise. So, thank you for your attention.
Questions for Anna? Comments?